Hello everybody from Montreal, Canada. Today here was played first round in Canadian Open Chess Championship. I managed to score a rather comfortable win with black pieces against Leong Aiden. Before we start to look at the game, I just want to let you know that I have not checked the game with an engine, so all the lines that you're gonna see are simply my own thoughts. So, as it is often in open tournaments, the pairings for the round were published just before the game, so there was no time to prepare for the game, and I had no information on my opponent or the openings that he is playing. So he played knight f3 in the first move, and I decided to stay very flexible with the lines that I could play, so I just chose to go for one knight f6. And here, after he played g3, I started to already think a little bit like, how could I make the game interesting? And I had a sudden, like, just in a moment, a wish. Okay, there was after g3 this interesting move of b5, and considering that my opponent is lower rated, I thought maybe getting out of the mainstream theory would be beneficial for me, so I just went for it. I have not analyzed this in depth for sure, and yeah, my memory on the lines here was almost non-existing, so it was just all me playing here and improvising by the board. So he played move on knight a3, which is very logical move in this position. So the idea of it being that in case I chose to push b4, he's gonna put his knight on c4, and in case I would later want to put my bishop on b7, it could be targeted with a knight from a5. So this move has actually a lot of point, even though it might look very odd. But once we are playing such moves in an opening that are slightly breaking opening principles, it's very important to know exactly how to proceed in a middle game. And we'll see that my opponent was actually not aware of the lines here more far than knight a3, and rather quickly got in a comfortable position due to this knight's misplacement. So in case, yeah, in when you're in a situation that you don't exactly know the opening and you know that there is some weird move, sometimes it's better to play just some normal regular moves like fighting for the center, like playing bishop g2, castling, and then looking about to take the center, for example, with d4. So you can't really go very wrong when doing any of those things. So now after knight a3, I choose to play a6, simply with an idea to keep this knight bad on a3. So now he answers with c4, which is of course the main idea of the move knight a3. So one of the main moves that we could play in this position is of course b4, but then after knight c2, knight is actually rather comfortable already, and I still have to waste some time trying to protect this pawn on b5. Alternatively, I could also just play e6 here, with an idea that if he is to take on b5, then I get to take on a3, and this is already very comfortable for me with double day pawns and a bit more space. But of course, in this position, white can answer with move b3, and this is something that I just didn't want to give him such an easy way out. So after being played b3, I don't anymore want to take on a3, of course, because he's gonna have two bishops and very big control on the dark sword diagonal here, and my b5 pawn can be sometimes under attack. So I would still have to think about it further. And so I decided a little bit to play for a bluff, and rather quickly, with thinking only like for 1 minute or so, I played bishop b7, which is of course very logical move since we played b5 mainly with an idea to put pressure on this diagonal as fast as possible. And in case he would right now take on b5, I was thinking to go for some lines like e5, and let's say he takes on a6, I would take here, and bishop g2, for example, take here, castle, and play some position like this, which I evaluated as rather complicated, and which was, well, basically the only thing I wanted from the opening here, just to have a complicated position. So let's say bishop b2 could follow. I could play d6. Later on, I would like to put my knight on c5, maybe coming wave 4. He could have some trouble finding a good square for the bishop from b2. But my opponent in this moment after bishop b7 uh, was not sure what he should be doing. Uh, yeah, alternatively, I was also thinking that bishop g2 could be a good move. Like, there can't be anything wrong with the move bishop g2 here at all. And in case I have to play e6 now, then again, he can answer with the same b3. So just playing naturally further. But he just went for a move d4. Move that could look kind of logical on the first glance because, well, we are taking a center and this is just one of the things that we want to do. But the big issue here is that white has already played the move g3 and weakened this diagonal a lot. So it means that they can only be really developing bishop through g2 and still that has to be done at some point. Another big drawback as all the time is the knight on a3, and now after d4 once I play move e6, we see that suddenly the move b3, that was all the time the best response against e6, is not working. Since now I can give a check on d4 and suddenly there is no way, no good way to defend the king. So if bishop is to come on d2, we lose the knight on a3, and if the knight is to come on d2, we lose the rook on h1. And so basically the only move that continues the game, stopping bishop d4, or does not allow to completely destroy the pawn structure, let's say takes and takes here, is c5, blocking my bishop. But that is already very slow, and now just I am trying to be super quick with my development, to be aggressive, so I'm going for the move d6 right now. So my thought was just that I gotta blow up the center as much as possible because white is still gonna need at least two moves to get the knight from a3 into the game. That means that I already have a development lead here with black pieces. So he takes on d6, which is very understandable since b4 move would be very risky now, as I can hit that pawn chain with a5, and now this is a threat. Later on this is gonna be a threat, and if he does take on b5, then again the knight will not have any moves whatsoever, so he can't keep the pawn chain intact. That means that probably it's not a good idea to play b4 here. So he takes on d6, bishop takes d6. I could have been taken also with my pawn on from d6. But the way I was thinking on this decision is that yes, for sure, black should be better here. But let's say in some lines like bishop g2, the most logical square for my knight seems to be d7. Let's say he castles, that I will not be able to cause him any trouble quick enough, and that he might manage rather comfortably to get knight back to c2. This bishop will have a good square on f4, especially if I do play d5. If I don't play d5, then my own bishop is not going to be really very active. So I chose to go for bishop d6 since that gives the biggest prospects for my piece activity. And later on, I am sure that I'm going to manage sometimes to play c5s. So my pawn on c7 or the c file is in no way an issue right now. He goes for bishop g2, finally finishing development. So now both of us are just doing logical developing moves, something that you just have to do always in the opening phase. And now is the moment when it's a rather uncomfortable situation for white, since there is no good square for this bishop from c1. If you come bishop g5, I'm just gonna hit it with h6 and you're gonna be forced to give it up. On f4, my bishop is already looking there, so in case you do that, you gotta ruin your pawn structure. On e3, it's not gonna do anything, and on d2 as well. One option that I was thinking, that was kind of logical, what you could have done here with white is play something like knight c2, and on moves like c5, maybe try to play b3 with an idea to develop bishop either on b2 or a3. But in any case, this position is going to be very comfortable with an advantage for black only due to the fact that knight on c2 is kind of awkward. It has nowhere to go. It's not doing anything. It's just standing there on the way. It can be even an issue that you have this knight because I can use it as a target for my attack. So he goes bishop f4 with the thought, like he later told me after the game, that he simply needs to develop pieces as fast as possible, which is, of course, a very logical uh, thought process. But the problem with that is that he creates a weakness for entire game. So now his king is gonna be weaker no matter what he does, since the G file is open. And yeah, so even if I don't manage to find anything in the middle game, even in every end game, and so on, I'll have a slight advantage here with black pieces. So I was very happy with the way things are going right now. And now, as I saw, I had two options. Either to play queen e7 with an idea to get to play for c5 later on in the game, or to try to go for c5 immediately. So if I was to go for c5 immediately, then he would take on c5 probably, knight takes c5, and I was not 100% certain about this position. If it's enough to actually push for a win here, or white is having some good chances to defend here. So if white would have still one more extra move somewhere to play b3 or something like this, uh, then maybe he's gonna be fine. But the problem is that I want to get with my knight to c3. So if he's yeah, does some normal move, then I'm gonna go knight a4. If he goes b3, then perhaps I can go someday knight e4 and start to uh, either get knight c3 or get with the rooks on the second file. But I was not certain if that is enough, since he maybe can use the pin here, or yeah, or just somehow block my entry squares completely. And in this kind of position, if I misevaluate something, the game can be just finishing in a rather comfortable draw. So I chose to go for an option that queen e7, just that simply leaves queen on the board, giving me chances for more complicated middle game. Knight c2, extremely logical move right now. Just getting the knight in the game, the piece that is completely out of the game. And in this moment, I should have probably went for c5 immediately. So for c5 immediately, then rook d8, and just quickly getting out with the pieces. The reason why I didn't do that was that I thought he's just gonna play e3, and I don't achieve anything much here, and I don't see how to prevent him from comfortably playing queen e2 and centralizing his rooks, and then when the time is right, somewhere looking to play knight e5 or exchanging on c5 and getting a very strong knight on d4. So to prevent that, I chose to play bishop e4 with an idea that now at least I can get my knight to d5 before playing c5, and him being forced to stay with a rather bad knight on c2. A bad knight for that reason that it's all the time under attack, so he has to be keeping an eye on it. He can't just freely do some things. And then when I'm gonna be ready to strike, then that moment I'm gonna play c5 yet. Because for now I'm just not giving him this d4 square, which I consider to be rather comfortable. Another thing why bishop on e4 felt rather like a good move for me is because, as I said, one of the main things I thought that white should be doing is e3, and in case I would play c5 and there would ever happen some exchanges, I get rather comfortable square for my one of my pieces on d3. In this moment he went for 95, trying to get rid of my bishop. So this is something that I was always very welcoming, and too, because that gives me a chance to get rid of his bishop on g2, so which was basically the only defender of the king at this moment anymore. So exchanging that one, even with the loss of tempo, seemed like a great thing for me. As my opponent pointed out after the game, he did not think at all that this could be an issue. That yeah, he exchanged the bishop on g2 and that the king could become weak in any way. So c5, I have to go break the center before he manages to play b4 and lock me down with a weak c5 pawn. C pawn, so we go c5, and now he took on d7. I was spending rather a lot of time now thinking if to take with the knight or with the queen. So the idea of taking with the knight is that in case we would exchange here, my knight would be ready somewhere to look uh, on a4, and the queen has options more easily to get to the king side. But why I chose to go for queen d7 was that I wasn't entirely sure what is my next step in case he doesn't take on c5. So what would be the benefit on knight on d7 in that kind of scenario? So I am taking queen d7. Now it seemed rather logical, yeah, to take on c5. Okay, of course he could also play e3 before that, with an idea that probably I'm gonna need to take anyway, since c4 is kind of risky, uh, as white also could quickly get e4, rook d1, knight d3, and rather strong counter game. But I had not entirely decided if I would go for c4 or I would take on d4 in this position just yet. So he takes, now I give a check, so of course that was the only move to get the pawn back, and now I have to take the pawn back without thinking about it much. So my opponent plays e3. What's interesting here, he was already leaning towards to grab the knight. He was like almost knight in his hand to play knight d4, which would be actually a rather big mistake because there's a big difference between the lines. Since now I get to play knight h5, queen h5, threatening to take the pawn, and if e3, I'm playing knight g4. So we are hitting h2. The only way to defend it is knight f3, and now after rook d8, queen comes to e2, and all of a sudden there is knight h2, since the queen is actually, yeah, hanging on e2. So that line would win a pawn. And what is interesting is that he actually did not see this line. The reason why he chose not to play knight d4 was that he didn't like queen b4 move, and he wasn't sure how to defend the b2 pawn, since he doesn't have a queen b3. But actually, that would not be an issue at all for white, because I think he can simply play b3 here. And now the big problem for me is that I never can play rook d8, since I'm gonna be having to deal with rather uncomfortable fork on c6, which means that my queen on b4 is basically just out of the game. So yeah, e3 I think was just the best move here because it's just keeping the white's position as solid as possible. In this moment, I spent some time thinking about some lines like knight coming to d5 with an idea that in case knight coming to d4, we could start setting up some knight f4 ideas. But what I didn't like always is that he is gonna get tempos with rook c1 to, yeah, develop one piece, and I don't exactly know where my queen should go. And the same goes for rook d8 as well, the knight d4, and if even in this moment I'm gonna try to go for e5, white gets an extra tempo of rook c1, and there's nothing more smart that I can do as just go something like queen d5, and anyways we get to exchange this simply with one free move for white. So I went for e5 immediately before there are any tempos. Of course b4 is possible, but that would only weaken the pawn in the long term, I think. So he takes on e5, of course that he has to do, otherwise I would just take and ruin his pawn structure completely. Queen takes and knight coming to d4 here. So in this moment, I had to decide what is gonna be my follow-up plan here. So naturally, I want to be attacking his king since he doesn't have too many defenders in front of the king. And to do that, I had to bring over my rooks. But for that, I needed to decide on which files and which rooks. So one of the main ideas I was thinking about was rook a8 here. But what I didn't like is queen f3, and now already I have to be dealing with knight c6 rather uncomfortably. And the problem why I didn't like this is that I also wanted to put my rook on the 6th rank where it would have options to hit all those 3 squares. But right now, if I am to play rook d6, he could just go queen g3 with a big problem that I cannot avoid queen exchange, since in this position he could simply go knight f5, hitting my rook and also threatening mate. So since I didn't like that, and I wasn't entirely sure how else to strengthen my position here, I thought that I have to jump with the knight uh, knight with the knight to e4 immediately. So to prevent queen from coming to f3, somehow it felt for me like it is the best square for the queen here. And in case he was to play here queen g4, I was thinking that I could maybe go f5. That was one of the ideas. And yeah, queen doesn't have any good squares. And probably the queen f4, we could go for this endgame, which I thought would be very, very easy to play for black since this is going to be a weakness for the entire game. And probably with the best play, it is possible to defend this endgame with white pieces, but it is going to be a very unpleasant game to be playing, and you are gonna have to suffer for very, very, very little time. So it's also very natural to not to want to go for something like this. What I thought was stronger for white was to play f4, forcing my queen to d5, and then playing something like queen f3, pinning me down here. And in case I'm playing some moves like rook a8, rook d8, yeah, just slowly getting in the game his pieces, could protect the pawn here with a4 or a3, then bring the rook over here or here, and just basically trying to wait out. Again, we are gonna always have advantage here with black pieces, but it could be such a uh, rather comfortable defense from the white side, since white at least also has some active ideas and is not getting completely smothered there. But he went for queen e2, which is as the move doesn't do anything. And this is the problem. Like we reached rather complicated position here, and my opponent simply was not sure how to proceed here at all. And queen e2 was the idea just to connect the rooks. And that is rather slow. And I immediately played rook a d8. Rook a d8 has an idea that now he is for sure not able to play moves like king h1. Of course, that is a nice bonus because here we can win a queen. King h1 was one of the moves that, of course, I was thinking as sometimes it could be useful to play from the white side, because if you do play it, then there are no longer tempos with any piece running to g file. Plus, you could start to think about getting your rooks over on the g file as well. And if even if not attacking, then provoking something like g6 could be very beneficial for white, because then I couldn't use the sixth rank as the way to lift my rooks. So now, uh, I was thinking that maybe the best choice, the best chance in this position for white is to go for something like a4. So the last moment to look for any counter game. In tough positions, it is important to be looking for some counter game because then at least if opponent makes something not so precise, then you have something to hold on for. At least trying to win somewhere, some pawn, or at least be having something to attack. And here just using the fact that this is all under attack. And in case of playing something like rook d6, then maybe can again switch it up with f4 ideas. And in case of knight c5, perhaps knight f3 could complicate things enough for white having some chances in this game. Of course, the king is very, very unsafe. I was not sure what is happening here exactly, but for example, after moves like queen h5, it is maybe even possible to take on b5, just to keep the game somehow a little bit more and more going. But instead, my opponent just played a kind of natural looking move, rook ac1, sometimes looking for knight c6, that the knight is protected, sometimes looking for rook c6. But the problem is that what he missed is that in all the lines, for example, if I have to play rook d6, that anyways he's not able to play here rook c6 because he would be hit with this line, and now there is a big threat. So yeah, since rook c6 is in no way possible, then rook ac1 didn't really do much. Why I chose not to play rook d6 in this moment immediately was not liking again f4. Of course, I can still give a check. King goes to h1, queen d5, queen going to f3 is covering this diagonal. And now the pawn could be hanging, but my knight is also hanging. And if I go play rook e8 now, he plays a3, and next move wanting to play rook c2 and being almost comfortable here. Again, always having a disadvantage due to e3 pawn, but nothing major is immediately happening. So I chose to go rook e8, try to keep the position more complicated, having sometimes some more pressure against the e file on the queen on e2, And in the already before mentioned line, the knight is not going to be hanging on e4 anymore, so we could maybe take the a2 pawn with comfort. But yeah, and in this moment, my opponent played rook d1. Again, move that doesn't exactly do very much on his own. Just yeah, just a move, which actually I think is a big mistake strategically, because it takes away defender from f2, and that opens me possibilities for loads and loads of tactics to be happening. So here I go rook d6, already looking to attack the king in a lot of different ways. And if he is to play something like f4, then we have rook g6, and after king h1, here is already a very nice looking move, queen h5 with a double threat. So one threat is that knight g3 is now a threat, and the other threat is him not being able to take on h5 due to very nice checkmate on f2. So that would not work. And if he's to play like queen f1, then I'm gonna go queen d5 already with threats like knight c3 or knight d2 and queen h1, rook g2, and winning the game in that kind of way. And if knight is to come to f3 now, I can already switch it up and go attacking from the other side. Or I also can just take the pawn, of course, and still keep going a few moves later for a win. Uh, there was an option still in this moment to play rook c6. So rook c6 with an idea that now after queen g5, not king h1, which would be met by queen d5, and after rook d6 there is a checkmate once again. But yeah, using the newly found square on f1 as a way to keep it together. But anyways, in this position I was able to take take on c6 and play some move like queen h6, hitting the knight and hitting the pawn on h2, so I'm at least winning one pawn, and I think that the white's position is practically impossible just to play due to all the threats. And not, something like knight a7 I can just ignore and just attack this guy further on. But yeah, my opponent played knight f3, which is just losing the game on the spot. So the reason, yeah, why it is losing on the spot, you can also pause and try to figure out on your own. It is actually very, very easy line. So we just go rook g6, and now king h1, and simply queen f5. Queen f5 with an idea that knight cannot move due to knight f2 threat. So and there's not much to do. If you go now rook g3, which is important point here is that the whole idea is just to go rook f6, not to exchange, not to checkmate, just attacking here. There is no rook g3 move, and if the knight goes away, we have knight f2 and even this checkmate immediately. So he still found some move that is a little tricky. So rook d4, with an idea that now after rook f6, like we played in a game, he just plays something rook c d1, and I am not able to take on f3 in this position due to rook takes e4, and if rook e4, then there will be rook d8 checkmate coming. So you always got to be careful, don't rush taking some pieces, because opponent usually has some idea, they're always trying to trick you. So if he's hanging a piece, that's a good moment to really take a pause and think, why is he doing it? So my thought process was simply uh, making sure that there is no checkmate. Here was now to go rook d8, we could just take, and hide with the king on h7. Again, this is hanging. King g2 is never possible because we just take give a check and take the knight on f3 and move later. And if he is to now go something like rook d4, again, I am in no rush. I mean, of course, we can go for much better, maybe even winning rook endgame here, but with one, maybe soon two pawns up, but as well could also do just simple waiting move because he's still not going to be able to get out with this stuff and there is no way to improve his position. So maybe a move like uh, queen g4 with a threat of rook f3, and knight f2 threats everything as well. Could be just winning the game on the spot, just like that. So he now went knight h4, after which, of course, I am just going to take the pawn on f2, king g1, and the idea is that now he doesn't have a way to cover even from checks. And after knight g2, I could take the take on f1, but on d1, but I thought, okay, here he's still gonna want to do some at least some moves, and instead I just took a moment and calculated that after knight h3, this is a very easy win because king h1 is the only move. Now I go rook f2, threatening queen and a checkmate, and at this moment my opponent resigned, but in case he would continue queen g4, then the whole idea is that we just take, and now we take rook b2, and this knight f2 is a very big fork coming, so we are winning an exchange anyways, and ending up still with some pawns falling. So very fast and very easy game. So that's why my opponent also redesigned at this moment because there are no more chances. So that was a rather comfortable win for me, a comfortable start of the tournament. And tomorrow we have a double round. So uh, looking forward Uh, yeah, looking forward to the first game with white pieces and already with some higher rated opponents. Hope you guys are enjoying this kind of format of analysis. And in case you want to be seeing them more often, then please do subscribe. Thank you.